I thought this was funny today. All three of these headlines hit today. This was like a takedown piece by Business Insider talking about how Russia basically supposedly their payments are bouncing when they've the sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine conflict have led to increased trade between Russia and China and the BRICS nations, as we've talked about quite a bit. The Western media is trying to say it's all falling apart because their payment systems suck. And the irony is, look what other headline hits today from Bitcoin Magazine: Russia legalizes Bitcoin and crypto for international trade to bypass sanctions. So the globalist media is correct that a lot of these payments through the fiat system are not going well. So what's it doing? It's forcing Russia to start trading with China and settling those transactions in Bitcoin. And then you mentioned El Salvador, Kyle. This was on the Badlands site today. So Bukele's been watching all of this play out. He's proposing using crypto to trade with BRICS alliance following Russia's recent legislative changes on crypto usage. So it's like a 1, 2, 3 combo where, ironically, the globalist media, even though they're putting it out as a hit piece, that, oh, look at these Russians and Chinese, they can't even settle their debts with each other because of all our sanctions on them. And they're proving why the sanctions was such a horrible idea for globalist nations, because it is forcing BRICS countries to not just transact with each other, but to do so out of the traditional financial system. They're being forced to go into a decentralized financial system to trade with each other. And this comes a week after Donald Trump says that we're going to start adding Bitcoin to a strategic reserve as a strategic reserve asset. It's like, it's perfect. Trump makes these moves and these deployments that are perfectly aligning him with all the BRICS nations, while Western globalist nations talk about how the sanctions and the petrodollar are totally owning the Eastern world.
Question. Can I? You got something, John?
No, go ahead.
My question is that more and more as I listen to some people, especially U.S. side, talk about Bitcoin, I'm hearing it in the context of it being a technology and not as a financial item. And we're talking about it as a financial item. But to me, the way I engage with Bitcoin, the thing that I think is the most significant about it is the technology aspect and the ledger aspect of it and what can be done with that. I wonder if when we see articles like this with other leaders in countries talking about Bitcoin and how they're going to utilize it, they're also talking about it in the technological sense and not necessarily in the financial sense, even though media tend to always frame it in the financial sense. Because I've been thinking about this since last Sunday's Defected, because I was looking at some comments in the chat during that, and I was thinking about other times we brought up Bitcoin and how it seems like everybody's talking, or a lot of us are talking past each other. And it's because one of us is talking about it as a financial piece, another person is talking about it as a technology, and still a third might be talking about it as something else.
Yeah.
Or a mix of those things. And so we talk past each other, and that causes misunderstandings. And so that led me to think just now, as you were reading that article, I wonder if that's a little bit of what's going on here. Because if Lowry is right, and if what Trump seems to be indicating is the direction we're heading, then all of these, there's going to be basically an arms race, or already is an arms race with Bitcoin as a technology, just like there's an arms race with AI and other things, right? Yeah. So articles like that and movements like that, which are signal, I'm kind of going bicameral with it, I guess. I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, are they talking about just one aspect of Bitcoin there? Or are they talking about two aspects? And are we going to look back at this time period at an article like that and regard that as another signpost in the arms race around Bitcoin?
Kyle, you've come a long ways on Bitcoin, haven't you? Like, what was it? It was like a year ago you were skeptical. I don't remember when, but was it software that changed your opinion?
Yeah. Software changed my opinion on it and caused me to see it a different way, because I was stuck in only thinking of it as financial.
Yeah.
And I was never against it. And I always thought, once I learned about the ledger, which was several years ago, I think, or a couple years ago at least, I thought, okay, Bitcoin stands apart from all the other cryptos. And I've always thought of it as separate from the other cryptos and having something special about it because of its ledger technology. But I never saw it primarily as technology until I read Soft War. And now I'm thinking about it in a whole new way. And it keeps on hitting me, like when I see an article like that or some other piece, I'm like, there's more than one way to consider what they're saying about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
My cop-out answer to that is not meant to be a cop-out, is I think, you mentioned your third option there was basically saying both. And I think that it's the fun thing when you read something like Soft War, you start engaging with the different definitions of Bitcoin, is that it really is both monetary and, I guess for lack of a better term, weaponry simultaneously, technology. And I think that those headlines, specifically the Business Insider attack piece on Russia and China, I think what you're saying there, the signal you're picking up on, is that the Business Insider's talking about it through the lens of transactions, which obviously we think of as monetary. But really, what's that article talking about? It's talking about warfare. It's saying Western sanctions, which are warfare, that's financial warfare, was declared on Russia. So the Western world, this is the thing. I know sometimes people think we're like being cute about this and saying we're already at war. The Western world is at war with Russia and China. They declared war on Russia with those sanctions, and they did so very intentionally. It's just not a kinetic war, but it's still it's arguably, well, I would say inarguably, it's a more devastating form of war in terms of two economies than kinetic warfare even is, right? Their whole point was to starve Russia and destroy it essentially through sanctions to isolate it. And when you've got Putin following up that article, well, not following up that article, but you've got the West sanctioning them, and then Putin going, if only there was a perfectly immutable technology that exists to immediately present a hard Uno counter to this warfare deployment by the West, maybe we'll use that. So it is both at the same time, right? They're talking about transactions, but to your point, Kyle, where I'll meet you and say it is more about the warfare aspect than the monetary aspect, they're not having a value conversation in these headlines. They're talking about Russia's goal isn't we're going into Bitcoin because it's worth a lot of money. They're going into Bitcoin because the ledger can't be stopped by Western sanctions. So really, it's just like a rail, a trend. You can think of it almost like a pipeline. I mean, we talk about Nord Stream, right? That's a physical pipeline. And what is that susceptible to? Exactly what we saw. Sabotage, kinetic attack, blockades, if you're talking about sea routes or anything like that. Bitcoin, you can form digital trade rails that even digital sanctions can't do anything about, because it's a completely decentralized system. So I do think you're right that when Bukele and Putin, when you've got Bukele on the sidelines representing like the global south and the emerging economies, I think that's a lot of signal, because they're saying they're watching what's going on with West versus BRICS, and they're saying, well, we're not getting on the winning side of who we think is going to win some kind of war. We're getting on the winning side of the technology that is going to allow us to transact no matter who wins whatever wars happen in the world.
But I look at this, the Bitcoin stuff has happened after all the sanctions stuff. Like the wars in Ukraine started, the West tried to sanction Russia right away, thinking, we'll just bleed them dry again. This is how we'll end up winning this war. We pump enough money into Ukraine and bleed them dry, we'll be fine. But it was by that time, I think it was Gonzalo Lira who had a great thread on this. Russia had already basically detached themselves from the West to a point where the sanctions had no effect. And all it did was basically scare other people from wanting to do business with the United States. And it only hurt us. And now we have this BRICS forming, man. I honestly don't know. I know Trump is huge on the dollar, at least he says he is. But I still think at some point the dollar itself may no longer be the world reserve currency. And something like a Bitcoin being a world reserve currency, that's interesting to think about, not just because of the technology stuff, but also, really it is the technology stuff, the ledger, like the immutable ledger, man. And BRICS is all moving towards it.
The Badlands running Let's explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.